Hi, I guess this is my podcast. I guess we're doing the podcast now. So, welcome to Grace Pilled. Welcome to the Grace universe. This is my podcast, and I've actually been wanting to do this for a very long time. And people have actually been asking me to start a podcast basically since I started my Instagram 5 years ago. And so I'm pretty stoked to finally be doing it. And I'm sure some of you are very excited that this is finally happening. And so this is my little intro. This is my little, let's set the stage conversation. And I just want to share some things that I think you should know about what's happening here. Let's set some reasonable expectations. I'm recording this right now on my phone. Okay? So the audio is not peak by any means. Almost all of the conversations that you're going to be hearing are Zoom recordings. And so if you're like a real audiophile, you might just have to suffer through this. Okay? And so that's the first thing to know. Second thing to know is I will be releasing new episodes every week on Thursdays. And so that's the rhythm. These first episodes are not going to be out of that order, but in general, new episodes will be every Thursday. And as for what Grace Pilled actually is, what is this season 1 that's happening here? Season 1 is a series of conversations with people all about their spiritual paths. And what ended up emerging about 3 interviews in to this process, because I take messy action. That is literally the way that I do everything in my life. I just fucking do it messy and clean it up. And about 3 interviews in, I realized that I wasn't just interviewing people. I was actually collecting what I'm calling spiritual biographies. And these spiritual biographies are the core of this season, with some sprinkling ins of Yapcast conversations with my friend Monica, who you will become very intimately aware of in the coming months. Okay. And so that's what this season mostly is. It's the spiritual biographies. I invite people on, I ask them to describe themselves spiritually and their background and their path. And then I ask them to tell their story. How did you get here right now? How did you arrive at where you are right now spiritually? And y'all, these stories are so good. Everyone is so different. One person, actually the first person, started their story before they were even born, okay? Their spiritual path started before they were born, okay? Most of the people I talked to had a very strong spiritual pull from a pretty young age, which was really interesting for me because I was an ardent atheist. Ardent Richard Dawkins atheist until I was 20. So I came to the path much later than most people do, or did, as far as the people that I interviewed. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to make this podcast in the first place, is because I have seen how people often get very caught up in comparing themselves to other people's spiritual experiences. I have seen it during Q&As that I've hosted. I have seen it working with clients and students over the years, this assumption that you must be doing it wrong if your awakening doesn't look like someone else's, like someone that you admire, whoever it is. And yes, of course, there's real value in spiritual traditions. I am not going to ever stop saying that. There's real value in structure and suggested practices, but there's a difference between immersing yourself in a path that changes your perception and thinking you have to match someone else's experience, okay? So I wanted to create a space that shows all the ways that the one God who permeates everything wakes up within her own dream. And this is something that I actually tell my students and clients quite often. I'm your spiritual trainer, like a gym trainer. I can point out if it seems like you're working on the wrong muscle group. But ultimately, if the purpose of life, if the purpose of life is for God to experience more and more of herself through unique expressions, and that is what I truly believe, then it would be incredibly boring for God to wake up in the same way through every person. The entire point of life, the entire point of the universe being created, was to experience more and more possibilities in consciousness. And so if that's the point of life, what would the point of everyone waking up the same way be? It literally is illogical, okay? And so this exploration of all these different ways that she wakes up within herself is the vision for season 1, okay? Now, what makes this podcast different? I mean, what's the point of listening to another spirituality podcast? There are a lot of them already out there, many that are probably going to be way better than mine. But I think, without sounding self-centered, I, literally me, Hanna, am what makes this podcast different. Now, looking objectively at my background, I've got a non-dual Shakti-tantric philosophy so deeply baked into my worldview that it naturally just informs literally how I see people, how I ask questions. Tantra is the background frequency running through everything I do, and I think that particular type of lens, being a deeply committed practitioner in a very specific spiritual lineage, adds a certain depth and groundedness that's not super common in the spirituality scene, I think. And I'm not someone who's just read a couple of books about like spirituality and decided to start interviewing people about their awakening. I've been practicing in a classical Shakti-tantric tradition since 2015. And at the time of recording this, that's coming up on 10 years. And I also am in the guru-disciple relationship for that entire time, and that shapes so much of how I show up, how much I think, how I live, and how I teach, is literally being a real traditional student for 10 years. Like, I have a teacher. You do not find a lot of people in the spirituality space online that have committed themselves to a teacher-student relationship. They're out there, but it's not most people. And so you will even hear during this season 1 a few guests that I bring on who have been in guru-disciple relationships and are currently in guru-disciple relationships. And so you're going to get to hear some perspectives that aren't just mine for once, okay? So I'm very excited for that. And it's not to say that me and my way is the best way. I'm only saying this stuff to kind of set the tone for what makes my view maybe a little bit more unique compared to other people that you might be listening to. So, who's this podcast for? Who is this for? Why have I made this? This podcast is for spiritually curious people. This podcast is for the skeptics turned seekers. Got a lot of those, definitely. This podcast is for people who maybe have already walked like a million different paths and are kind of feeling ready to land somewhere. Or at least are kind of like craving their spiritual village to finally put down their belongings and really settle in. I also attract people who are really into personal responsibility, like radical responsibility for their role in their life. And I'm generally pretty upfront about that. That's just my vibe. I'm really in the you gotta own your own shit camp. And so if you're not into that, that's cool. You can just go listen to people who don't believe in taking responsibility for themselves and see how that works out for you. Okay? So I'm going to wrap this up. A couple of content notes. Some stories in this season touch on pretty big traumas, things like childhood sexual trafficking or very severe familial abuse. And I will always kind of let you know that's what's happening when I introduce the episode, so you can consent to listening. And a few other things. What's up with my name? Grace Pilled. Grace is the name that I finally, Grace Pilled is the name that I finally landed on because it captures the core of everything that I base my life around, which is grace. And if you don't know what grace is, it's not like Christianity grace. It's the grace that permeates the Shakti-tantric traditions and also Shaiva Tantra. And if you want to learn more about what is this grace thing, Grace 101 Part 1 is free on my Patreon. You literally just need to become a free member and you get access to like a 2.5 hour long talk. And that will definitely paint you a picture. And so I highly recommend that to be the place to start if you want to learn more about me. But like for real, all I ever really do online is try to grace pill people. I'm just trying to get people interested in the force of evolution at work in the universe that's trying to help them to wake up to their own essential nature. So like take the grace pill or not. You can do whatever you want, but I am always trying to get people to take the grace pill. So something else you might wonder when you start listening to my podcast is, Hanna, why don't you have a theme song? To which I respond, I skip every theme song of every podcast or TV show I have ever watched. So why on earth would I put something in my own podcast that I don't even like or care about? Okay. So no theme song for now. That may be subject to change. And to actually for real wrap this up, if you ever want to connect with me beyond the podcast, you can find me on Instagram at grace.pilled. My website is hannawilliams.com, Hanna Williams.com. My dad bought me that domain name in literally like 1997. Okay, so wild. That's the lore there. And my website is where you can book with me if you ever want to talk one-on-one. I have some merch and stuff on my website, interviews with other people that I've done. And my Patreon, of course, is the beating heart of the entire operation. That's where you're going to find all of my past talks and courses and Q&A sessions, these sorts of things. All right. So it's been 12 minutes, and I want you to listen to the first episode. All right? So let's get into it. Thank you for being here.